Hey, deserving listeners, this is Chapter 3 in our deep dive on the psychology of Josh Powell. We are going to continue with the storyline, and at the end, we will provide our analysis. I will provide my analysis of their personalities, not only Josh Powell, but also his father, Stephen. So let's get into it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I'm a zookeeper coach.
I want to provide a recap of what we've already established in chapters 1 and 2. So very briefly, Josh Powell, second of 5 children to Stephen and Teresa Powell. The parents, Stephen and Teresa, fought a lot. Stephen was also abusive, both physical and verbal. He sounded quite severe. He was particularly abusive to Josh. Stephen was also highly permissive with the children and highly undermined the mother's attempts to provide structure. There's also some very minor evidence that the mom might have been rejecting as well. So there's that possibility, but I don't know. I don't want to throw the mom under the bus because she shouldn't be blamed for any of this. Also, Josh was struggling emotionally, which is understandable given everything that he was going through, being abused and targeted. And he would write in his journal, and there were observations from the outside that he was struggling emotionally. And one example of this is that he had a serious suicide attempt when he was a teenager, and he went to a therapist or a psychiatrist or something. Now, there didn't seem to be signs of early psychopathy or early psychopathic personality or any antisocial personality, at least not the typical pattern.
Except maybe the pets, right?
Right. He did kill the sisters' gerbils. I also heard or read that he didn't kill multiple gerbils. He just killed one gerbil. It doesn't really matter.
Sure.
Well, it kind of matters because I want to know the details about that story.
I killed my brother's fish when I was 9 or 10.
On accident?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
I was visiting, and I was just trying to feed them. And I didn't realize that you could totally overfeed fish really easily.
Could have been subconscious. You were jealous that he had access to your mom and you didn't.
Yeah, but I mean, I love animals, so it's like... And this is what led me to become a zookeeper coach anyways. But It was sad.
Yeah. Right. So was it semi-accidental? Was it extremely psychopathic, like Jeffrey Dahmer kind of stuff? Did he dissect the body like Jeffrey Dahmer? Yeah, there's a lot of options here. There's a lot of room on that spectrum, and we just don't really know. But, that is one sign of psychopathy. Also, there were reports that he was abusive to his mother. But again, that was heavily modeled to him by his father. It would be surprising if he didn't have some aggression towards his mom, given the way that Stephen was acting towards everybody, including the mom.
Right.
Now, what we don't see for Josh, I think this is important in the data, and I'm guessing we would have heard about this, is we don't see a pronounced pattern of lying and cheating and exploiting others and breaking rules and breaking laws and having run-ins with the police and getting sent to the principal's office and getting in physical fights and being impulsive. We don't hear a pattern of that the way we would with someone like Charlie Manson, for example, or other psychopaths that I work with.
One of the things that when we were talking last time, I kept thinking that to me that the dad sounded a lot more generally, I don't know what the right word is for it, but generally aggressive and not okay to be around. Whereas like what you're saying, it seems like at least in those early phases, other than troubled, potentially suicidal, well, clearly suicidal and whatnot. Yeah, it didn't seem to fit the pattern of the...
Right.
Yeah.
If anything, he seemed shut down and depressed, inert, if you will. What we also saw is avoidant attachment in that he was withdrawn and self-reliant and perhaps narcissistic and restricted affect, restricted emotional expression. That's the reports. So we'll keep that in mind as we move forward. All right. So let's jump forward to 97. Josh is in his early 20s, maybe 20 years old at this point, and he's in college now. And there were a lot of different reports of his years in college. He spent time in a few different institutions, community college, UW, this sort of thing. So I might be getting some of the details wrong, but the broad strokes are the following: that in his journal, he would write about not getting along with other students. He would live in the dorms, or he would live in an apartment with other students. I couldn't tell if he knew these guys from high school or if he just met them or what, but he didn't get along because he struggled socially his whole life to some extent anyway. But also, these guys were typical college guys. They were drinking and using marijuana and partying and doing all that kind of stuff. And Josh wasn't into that kind of thing. He didn't like to go to parties. He didn't like to drink at all. He didn't like to smoke marijuana. And sometimes this would escalate into violence, fights. And he would say that he was being bullied, which I don't necessarily doubt, but it's from his account, so it's hard to know, right? You know, if we talk to the other guys, they might say, no, we didn't bully him. We gave him every chance. One time it came to blows because he was throwing fists at, who knows? Yeah. But things were not going well for him. He also wrote that he thought he was depressed. He also wrote that he thought that his dad resented him. He initially, after the divorce, when he's 16, went to live with his dad. But after going to college and being separated from his dad, he seemed to wonder if his dad was a problem. Maybe that his dad resented him or had envy of him, because Stephen shows a lot of signs of narcissism, And it makes me, if the father were to be jealous, envious of Josh, if the father did in fact suffer from narcissistic personality, what would Stephen, a grown man, probably like 40 years old at this point, be envious of Josh for at this point?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. Well, so there's a couple of things immediately come to mind. One is the simple, like, gosh darn it, that's a younger version of me with the world ahead of him, and I'm getting older.
Right.
That sucks.
That's my hypothesis.
Right.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that comes to mind is, I don't know if there's accounts, like, he just had a failed marriage, and I do wonder if he was, kind of accusatory of the influence that, because if he is narcissistic, he wouldn't blame himself for the failed marriage, right? So it'd be like, man, it's all the kids or whatever. Could easily be, and Josh being the oldest one could probably take the brunt.
He wasn't old, he was second oldest.
Or sorry, yeah, but the oldest male, whatever.
Yeah.
So I could see him being like, it's his fault,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. So after attending community college, he eventually was a student at the University of Washington, where you and I went.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell if he was at the Seattle campus or the Tacoma campus, because he lived in
Was there already a Tacoma campus at that?
Maybe not.
I don't know.
But anyway, he might have been a student at the Seattle campus soon after you left, right? Because you left UW what year?
Fall of 97.
So yeah, you might have just been missing him just by like one term or something. Initially, he wanted to study architecture. So what do you think about this choice, Berto? What's the stereotype of architecture students at UW?
I guess in my mind, they like art. They're very meticulous, very detail-oriented, and probably have to do good in things like math so they can... Because, architecture, even though you're not like doing all the math, it is kind of an engineering.
I have some friends who worked in that industry, and what they would say is that a lot of architects are narcissistic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess, okay, now that I think about it. But
I could have looked up the research on it, but I didn't. But
like they all read The Fountainhead.
That, and you're in control.
Yeah.
And it's a prestigious job.
It's like a doc, like a surgeon or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like a fancy surgeon.
Yeah.
Because you imagine an architect has a really cool fancy house.
Yeah.
You make good money, that kind of thing. So who knows? Maybe he was just into architecture, but it's also possible that this was a manifestation of his narcissism, his attempt to fill the void inside of him that was left behind by Stephen and the lack of attunement that Josh received growing up. And he's filling it with this grandiose, superior notion, trying to counteract the abyss in his personality.
I have two architect uncles, and one of them lives in Colombia, in Manizales, and he's built two of his own houses, and he currently lives and is retired in this house he built. I admire it so much, like just that skill of like being able to like plan it all out and figure out what materials you need and then do it and then live in it. And these are sweet places, you know?
Yeah, it's kind of the Venn diagram between genius artist and a doer, someone who actually can make things.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's not just a painting on a wall.
Yeah.
It's a functional, you just know that their cabinets are super well designed and
totally.
The flow of the hallways to the doors,
exactly.
To the, everything's just right. So he eventually, though, Berto gives up on architecture. Yeah. I don't know why, but he did. I imagine it was hard because I know architecture school can actually be quite grueling. I think the UW architecture school is prestigious on some level, and you can imagine there being a bit of a weeding out process. I don't know. He didn't really have a major at this point at UW. He starts taking drama. Did you ever take drama at UW? A lot of people took that.
Really?
Well, you and I weren't the typical general liberal arts students.
No.
But I think a lot of them would take the intro drama class. I had a lot of friends that took that class.
Most of my classes were math and engineering, and then I had music.
Exactly. Me too. Yeah. All my electives were music classes. One class I took was composition. So I'm in a class with a bunch of classical music writers, symphony and piano, and I walk in with my shitty acoustic guitar and I'm writing like rock songs and folk songs. And I just went for it and they accepted me. So he takes a drama class and he suddenly decides that he wants to pursue a career in acting.
No narcissist in acting.
I think that this is evidence of a few things. One is that it's the beginning of a pattern of his that I'll provide more data of him changing his career very frequently without any theme to it. It just seems to go all over the place. I think there's a number of reasons for that, which I'll provide later. But there's that. Also, there's this desperate need to fill narcissistic supply, not in the same way that Stephen does. Stephen, his father, is much more typical in the narcissistic supply. For Josh, it's not as typical, but I think present. Also, Josh is depressed and knows it and is looking for something to grab onto. Also, Josh is looking for friends. And, when I was in drama in high school, it's a very bonding experience to go through a production with people. There's a lot of backstage hanging out and after parties and depending on each other and fun on stage together. Like you have a scene with someone and shenanigans happen when you're rehearsing and it's really bonding. So
it was really sad in Colombia when I was still there. My friend Juan Miguel, whom you met, and we were in drama class. And at first it started like, 10 students. And slowly they started dropping out because it wasn't one of like the official classes. It was like an extra activity. And the last two remaining people in the class were us two. And the guy, just kind of like trying his best. Like,
why were people leaving?
I think they either didn't like the teacher or they were like, this is lame. I don't know. But so he's like, it's okay. We'll put on a 2-person play with you two. And I was like all into it. But Juan Miguel eventually was like, dude, I don't want to do this. This is embarrassing. So we ended up dropping out.
That's too bad. I mean, it could have been cool.
I think so.
With the right script.
But we have very different personalities. I would have done a 1-person play.
Yeah. I'm surprised you didn't throw that out there.
I know.
So
let me just monologue.
Yeah. So he decides he wants to pursue a career in acting after giving up on architecture. And he tried out for a play and he was hoping to get a really awesome part, which I find to be hubris because...
Of course, you start at the top.
Yeah. Another narcissistic...
At a college.
Yeah.
It's one thing when you're like a little kid in second grade and you're like, well, I hope I can be Rapunzel or something.
Still, the first play, because there's no reports of him having acted before, and I'm guessing we would have heard about that. He certainly doesn't seem like the sort of person that would have done that before. And in college, your first foray, you're going up against people that have probably been in dozens of productions since they were 7 years old. Of course, he didn't get a good part. He didn't even get a speaking part, and he immediately gave up on his career as an actor, and he became depressed.
Oh, man.
He also wrote and recorded audio in his journal that he really wanted to have friends, and he would plan things out. He's like, I need more friends, and I need to work on my social skills. And he decided that he was going to organize dinners at the apartment, and people actually were coming. And he was quite proud in his audio journal that a few people were coming. And in the beginning of this process, he was declaring it this huge success, which, okay. But he has this pattern in his journal of looking for anything to hold on to. This is how I'm hearing it.
Sure.
And when something's going well, he just latches on and is, I think, hoping that it's a sign of things to come, which isn't strange. A lot of people do that. I imagine mostly young people would be doing that as well, because you don't really know what your life is going to be like. You haven't been on your own. He's only been on his own for a couple of years. But at the same time, in his journal, he's complaining about his friends rifling through his fridge and eating all his stuff, and it's costing him a lot of money. He's very focused on money, and he's very what people would call cheap or frugal or something. A lot of focus on that sort of thing. So having people over to his house for dinner, it's expected he's going to provide the food, right? Or if they run out of food, they're going to start rifling through his stuff. And look, I remember those days.
Sure.
I mean, when in college, it was a fighting offense if you took if you took like someone's Pop-Tart.
It was a firewall. You cannot cross that firewall.
Because we didn't have any money, and if we bought something, especially if it was sought after, like Pop-Tarts or chips or something, never would I have bought a bag of chips. Forget about it. That's just like too much money. And if someone ate it, that would be the end of our relationship.
Those were my chips.
Yeah. So hearing this journal, if I just try to because initially I'm like, oh, there's that anger. He's thinking about killing those people because Josh is a murderous psychopath. But I have to check that. And also a lot of the reporting, when they will provide these clips, it seems like a lot of people are saying Monday morning quarterback. Have you heard that phrase before?
It's a baseball term, right?
In other words, 2020, in retrospect, that look at that. He's obviously got a problem with his personality. And if I heard this, I would think totally normal. And the fact that he's organizing dinners and he wants to have friends and he likes it, that people like, I think I was telling you recently that I like having a house where people come over for parties and get-togethers and casual things. And I like that I just leave my door unlocked and friends just walk in. They don't even knock on the door, partially because of the dogs, but also because, I don't know, I just want people to feel like they can walk like you.
Yeah.
You have the code to my security to the whole house. Because
and you still haven't noticed when I break in the middle of the night.
Yeah. And I always wanted that. And I think he wanted that too. He's a little awkward, but that's all you can really say at this point. There's not like a predictable path towards murder at this point. But it's also notable that in his journal, there's nothing or very little about other people. The way he writes, it's similar to the way Stephen writes, his father, in that it's all about himself and all about how he's processing things. There's nothing like, and then Johnny told me that he likes his new job, and I'm really happy that these two people are not getting along, and I'm worried about their comfort level. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. So I never thought of that aspect of, because of course there's this idea that if you read someone's journal, you can learn a lot about them. But I actually never thought of that idea that if you read someone's journal and all they do is talk about their own experience and their own thoughts and feelings, it does say something.
Right.
You know?
Well, like, what would your journal look like?
It would be mostly about my thoughts and feelings. I've tried journaling throughout the years. I have little entries here and there, and usually it's about whatever I've been struggling at the time with.
Yeah. And it's hard to draw conclusions personality-wise. There are studies along these lines, and of course there's simplistic notions in our society that, if you see the word I or me a lot, it correlates with narcissism. I actually think it's the opposite. I can't remember the research. It's not intuitive as a thing. Also, what's the purpose of a journal for an individual? For you, and for a lot of people, it's when you're struggling.
Yeah.
When you're upset, when you're sad, when you're struggling with your marriage, or when you just got in a fight with a friend, or your career is going bad. So if you looked at your journal entries, it would look like all about you, and it would look very negativistic, right?
Yeah.
But you don't use your journal to report on daily activities, or to talk about other people, or to talk about your joy in life or successes. So it's hard to draw conclusions about personality. However, I would say that the style of journal that he had, it was the kind where it was daily. It was a personal log. And it is a sign of narcissism, maybe not severe narcissism, but on the spectrum somewhere, in that, one, the individual feels that their life is important enough to document. You know what I mean? A lot of people are just like, well, why would I spend the time to document my stupid life? What's the benefit? No one cares. You know what I mean? It's sort of in the direction of thinking that there should be a biopic made about you. You know what I mean? Narcissistic people on one end of the spectrum would definitely think that would be true. Oh, my life would make a wonderful movie, that kind of thing. Lower on the spectrum, people might journal. Now, people who journal aren't necessarily narcissistic, but it is one of the things that I have seen. The other aspect of narcissism that isn't usually talked about is isolation and loneliness. Narcissistic people are some of the most deeply lonely and isolated individuals on the planet because they were neglected emotionally when they were young, kept at a distance from 0 to 5, and learned to give up and to only rely on themselves. And so they don't even signal to other people. They don't reach out. They don't they don't signal their needs. They don't bid for love or support. And so people don't even know to come to them because they seem like they're strong and independent and they seem to have it all figured out, kind of a thing. And they also are terrified about extending themselves that way because in the past, when they were 2 years old, it never worked out for them, or very rarely. So,
I mean, I can relate to that. We've talked about that, how, for most of my life, I never reached out. I still struggle with that anyways, but certainly there's a combination of things. One, though, is the idea that I didn't want to, which I realize it's overdoing it, but I didn't want to fall in the trap of, like, say, my dad or other individuals like that, where they become dependent. And so I have like this phobia of becoming dependent on other people. And again, dial it to 11 when I didn't need to. But then also I think
And just to put a fine point on that, there's nothing wrong with being independent and
of course,
and steering away from mooching off of other people.
Right.
But the dark side to that is that no one feels like you need them.
Exactly.
And therefore you don't really care enough to be vulnerable around them, like emotionally especially.
Right. And I've experienced that both in micro and macro ways, where in a social situation, people would just assume that I'm impervious to pain or suffering and everything's just fine with me.
Well, and you give off, not to me as much in the last 5 years, but you give off a vibe that you're cool as a cucumber.
Yeah.
You can roll with any situation.
Even if internally it's pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And then there's a macro of it, which is, like just no one, me not reaching out / no one calling up and going like, hey, are you okay? Right? Like those kinds of things. And I think there is something to that where it's like what you were saying, abandonment when you're young, the fear that, well, if I do reach out, I'll probably be rejected anyway. So what's the point, or those kinds of things.
Right.
And coupled with what I mentioned about this kind of phobia of becoming dependent.
That's interesting. I mean, so you feel that?
I've obviously processed through a lot of it, and actually a lot of our conversations have helped. Like we had our whole hospital buddies conversation.
Yeah.
But I feel like I still have that for sure, where it's like I don't want to end up that way. When I look back, that there was this period of my life when I was like 35 or something, where I see a fork in the road. And I saw that one side of the road led to me becoming dependent and like
Financially,
yeah. And I was like, oh God. And I had such a phobia of that future that I was able to steer myself away from that. And I really think that plus therapy were the main things that ended up saving me from that self-fulfilling future.
yeah, there were a lot of elements that saved you.
Yeah.
Also being vulnerable to your wife.
Right.
Instead of just trying to weather the storm, you
That's right.
opened up and said, I have to tell you what's
Right.
happening, not only financially, but also emotionally for me
Yeah.
right now. And then you worked together and pulled yourself out of that. And now you're doing great, right? So when you are in that situation, personality-wise, that's the defense, the adaptation, then you don't reach out to other people. You have to vent somewhere, though, usually.
You have to vent somewhere.
A journal is perfect because you don't have to bother anyone. You don't have to depend on anyone. You're just internally in this closed loop of express and support.
Yeah.
And it's a lonely experience, but you're getting some need of expression, some need of communications, and even supporting yourself in a way. You know what I mean? Let's take a break real quick. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're back from the break. So I thought we would listen to some of his journal. This is on the Cold Podcast, which is the definitive source for all things Josh Powell.
Josh had a long history of failing to connect with girls. His written journals are full of entries about struggles in dating. His audio journals are even more telling. Here he is, in his own voice, reacting to one rejection.
To lose such a good friend. I didn't want it to end. I know you're in a better place, but it still so broke my heart.
So just chiming in here, the beginning of this recording, this audio journal, is a little confusing, but in a little bit, it becomes more clear that he's talking about a girl or a young woman that broke up with him, and he's, I think, trying to frame it in a positive way.
And he filled me up. He replaced my broken heart with incredible joy. Some of the greatest joy you could possibly imagine. You taught me so much about where I want to be, and especially how to take care of people, and also who I am and who I want to be. I've never met someone so full of love. Your example was so powerful that it didn't take months or years. The footprints you've left in my heart are some of the deepest I've ever known.
So thoughts on this audio journal, Berto?
It sounds very pained. I don't know if this was his usual speaking style.
It is.
Yeah,
Not in
okay.
this exact mode, but that's the style. It's soft. Would you
Yeah.
say it's soft?
Soft, but also it just sounds full of pain.
And fragile.
And fragile, definitely fragile.
Yeah. What else do you hear?
What's interesting is, and I'm sure that I'm biased because I know the outcome of this whole thing, but there is a sense, what I hear a little bit of is passive aggressiveness. There's this weird thing where it's like, on the surface, if you read the transcript, it all sounds so positive.
Right, because he's being dumped. He's been dumped.
Right.
And he's saying, you opened my eyes. I'm more compassionate now.
Right.
You've inspired me.
Right.
You're such a great person. But
But-
you think there's some...
Well, because for one thing, I don't think this was intended for that person to hear, right?
Oh, yeah. No.
Because these are the kinds of things that would be great for that person to hear, right? So, because
And maybe he did.
Yeah.
There were reports that he would say and write these kinds of things to
Okay.
These women.
Maybe I'm wrong.
He was sort of two different people when it came to dating. On one hand, he was like Stephen, his father, in that he was obsessed in the beginning with the unavailable or with the chase or with the new infatuation, which isn't strange. People can be that way. Plus, when you're narcissistic and you are denied that attachment early in life, you proceed to avoid attachment throughout your life, but you're desperate for attachment. And so when you are in that beginning infatuation, it will, that energy, that infatuation energy will overpower your defenses and alert you to this deep, deep need. And so you will become, terribly infatuated and putting all your eggs in this basket that's finally come your way, because you're not even vulnerable with your friends or anybody. So you're not only looking for a romantic or sexual partner, you're looking for like a romantic partner, a sexual partner, a best friend, a mother that will finally love you, someone that will listen to your dreams and compliment you and believe in you. And, everything comes pouring out. Also, because you're narcissistic, you need to believe that everything you do is special and superior and grandiose. And if you're having an emotion, it must be the most love anyone has ever felt. And if you have a good relationship with someone, it must be better than all other relationships. And if you love someone, then that person must be superior. And so there's a lot of things conspiring to severely amplify the initial infatuation. Then the other side is, once you establish the ongoing relationship and you hit cruising speed, then you can't tolerate the closeness and the vulnerability, so you retract. So we're seeing one side right now. We're hearing one side of it. And I think he could have been very expressive to her in person as well.
Yeah, quite possible.
So he would apparently confidently hit on a lot of young women. He would just walk up to women at stores or in class or at church. I don't know if he thought of himself as a lover boy or if he was desperate or if he just said, screw it. You gotta play the game in order to win the game or something. I don't know. There's probably some saying from somewhere, right?
There is an aspect of, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is an aspect to psychopathy where you don't feel fear the same way, right?
Yep. Yeah. That could be a factor. But again, I don't see any extreme indications of psychopathy in that sort of classic antisocial personality, but could be. I think he desperately wanted to be loved, and I think he desperately wanted to belong as well. I don't think he just wanted a partner. I think he wanted to belong to an enmeshed. I think he was looking for a mother, not consciously, and I think he was also looking for a family in some way. He was very distressed about his parents' divorce. Children seem to enter this world with a desire for family and belonging and group bonding. Children are not only selfishly interested in keeping their family together, because if parents split up, then they might not get their parents' full attention because they'll only get attention from one parent at a time, Or they might worry that if you're rejecting mommy, are you going to reject me? Is that, So, and that's normal and that's healthy and that's fine. But I also think that there's evidence that children just have an innate instinct for group cohesion. It would make sense evolutionary wise that children and humans would be programmed that way. And I think that he suffered like a lot of kids will through divorce. And I think he was always looking for that, because there were young women that he became infatuated with, not only because they were attractive to him and had the values that he was looking for. He's looking for like a young woman that didn't drink and didn't swear and went to church and was family oriented. That, nothing wrong with that. But he also seemed to be attracted to women who were parts of groups, often religious groups, and not only was attracted to the woman, but also was like, oh, look at this. Like he became a born again Christian at one point.
Right. So it's the group belonging, not just the person. It's like a package deal.
Right.
Yeah.
All in one, right? Not only love and sex and togethership, but also like she comes with family and group and community and religion. And he because there's this one woman that he dated, and he talks about in his journal that he went to the born again meeting, and remember he's a Mormon,
right?
It's pretty far. A lot of Mormons will say, and not all, but they will say Mormons are the only real.
Of course, yeah. Each sect says that.
Right. And you can't just like transfer that over, And so he was at a born again Christian meeting of some kind, and a kid came up to him, a little kid, and he talks about this in his journal, and the kid was, I think said, "I love you," eventually to Josh. And Josh was writing about that in his journal, and he's just like, it felt so good to have this kid say that he loved me. I want to be with this woman. You just hear the vulnerability. And I want to talk about all this, not only to provide the data, but also to show that Josh is a human being, not to humanize him, so to speak, for his benefit, but to dispel the nonsense out there that people that commit crimes, like what he will eventually do in this timeline, not only murder and do horrible things to Susan's body to dispose of it, but also the murder of his 2 sons by his own hand and then blowing up his house. These are horrific, horrific crimes. The typical conceptualization is that these are monsters through and through, 100% of the time, since the day they were born. We're not hearing that. We're hearing, maybe a somewhat depressed and isolated young man who has been through a lot of abuse and a lot of family turmoil.
Right.
He has been bullied by peers. Maybe he's a little socially awkward, but he seemingly has the ability to win people over at times.
Yeah.
He's struggling with his career, but he's working on a business degree at the University of Washington, pretty successful in academics, smart young man, attractive to a lot of young women, would say that he's an all-American, attractive, tall boy, has his life before him. The future is not written in stone in the least. And that's what I want to go over, not only to just dispel of the myths, but also to point out that the path to murder and suicide is many.
Yeah.
And this could have been changed. His future could have been altered if our society were different, if the family were different, if he was open to other things, if our society was different regarding masculinity, maybe. I don't know. There's a lot of things that we can do and we could have done to have prevented this, just in terms of his own personality. So that's what I want to talk about. So also during this time, he starts writing about he wants to repair his relationship with his mom and his older sister, Jennifer, because during the divorce, remember, he had to
choose,
make that split. And over the years, he would increasingly write in his journal and talk about in his journal, he was realizing that Stephen, his father, was actually a bad influence. The father never taught him how to follow the rules, and that his father was, conflictual and combative and was influencing the kids away from healthy paths, this sort of thing. So in this point in his journal, if this is all that you heard, you would think you have someone that is emerging into health, and he's fairly self-reflective. He's willing to talk about his deficits, that he has issues with social skills, and that he needs to remember to watch what he talks about with people because he doesn't want to alienate people. I think he even writes in his journal he needs to learn how to listen more.
What?
Good. So he eventually graduates with his bachelor's degree in business, which is the exact same degree that I have. And it's a somewhat prestigious business school, the
Yeah.
Foster School of
Yeah,
Business.
it's good.
And it's not super hard. I wouldn't say that, but it's a thing. And he did graduate, and that shows that he was functional enough for that. So at this point in the story, Berto, Josh meets his very first significant girlfriend. And there's a lot of parallels between his relationship with this first girlfriend and his second girlfriend, which is Susan, his wife, who
his
he
wife-to-be.
presumably killed. And I want to go over that relationship because it sets the stage, and it shows that Josh wasn't with Susan in a particular way. It was Josh, not them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If he's the same way with both women,
Right.
what's the common denominator? But before going into that, let's take a break. When we get back, the rest of this will just be for patrons of the podcast.
Okay.
So if you want
Patron
to,
zone.
so if you want to hear the rest of this episode, become a patron by going to patreon.com. Patreon's over there. I just pointed at it. And otherwise, please take care of yourself because
You deserve it.